Hello wrestling fans. The Pro Wrestle Machine back again with another program. Let's dive right in. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. May 26, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Flair returns to the ring. Slambroree Ppv. MMA falling harder, more. By Observer Staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. May 26, 1997. After the longest ring absence of his career, a full 8 months after surgery to repair a torn rotator cuff suffered in a Japanese match against Kensuke Sasaki, Ric Flair, the greatest wrestling performer of his and probably anyone else's time, returned to the ring at age 48 on his home turf, the Charlotte Independence Arena for Slambroree on May 18. The show, almost universally well received, saw Flair and local football hero and last year's NFL sack leader Kevin Greene of the Carolina Panthers and longtime Flair wrestling rival Roddy Piper from the so-called glory days of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling face Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and Six in a match probably more interesting for its behind-the-scenes political ramifications than for anything that took place in the ring. There had been numerous ideas for the main event, including Flair and Greene, two of the city's biggest sports heroes, on opposite side of the ring due to last year's Steve McMichael-Greene angle, figuring McMichael, as a horseman, should team with Flair and Greene, who was turned on by McMichael and screwed with by Flair in his last appearance. Beat with the babyface team? Ideas changed by the moment, and it wound up with Flair and Piper and Greene against the NWO, but when Hulk Hogan decided his movie commitments wouldn't allow him to do the date, or whatever his real reason may have been, Hall and Nash suggested Six, an idea Flair and Piper balked at, which led to words being said in some interviews on television on both sides that didn't go anywhere close to how they were scripted. In recent weeks, both sides had gotten on the same page, and whatever has been said the past few weeks was all business and not ego, at least as much as that's possible in a business fueled by out-of-control egos. Piper, who has creative control of all his angles, attempted to pull out of the match, which led to a booking concession and eventually to Hall, Nash and Six agreeing to do a three-way job finish which popped the crowd locally beyond belief. In return, Hall and Nash theoretically get their win back in Moline, Illinois on June 15, where Flair and Piper get to do their angle, and the two legends of the past generation and longtime friends get to work together and do their thing without worrying much about wrestlers who either have no respect for what they've accomplished in this business, or wrestlers who look at things based on what people can do today as opposed to what they may have done in another place on another day. Of course, that latter attitude is forgetting that it is something that can all be thrown out the window when it comes to judging certain individuals. Flair's return drew a sellout of 9,643 paid and $167,705, the second largest gate in the long and storied history of Charlotte wrestling, a 1985 outdoor stadium match between Flair and Nikita Koloff that drew 27,000 fans remains the all-time record. Merchandise sales topped $100,000, among the largest in company history. Was it a success? By the standards that made Hulk Hogan the greatest wrestler of all time, it was. Hogan isn't the greatest wrestler of all time? By the standards that made Ric Flair the greatest wrestler of all time, the reality of being 48 has turned him into a regional version of Hulk Hogan. Hey, there are worse criticisms than being compared with the biggest money maker the sport has. Although none worse to a fan of Flair, comparing him to Flair's fans symbolic antichrist. But standards of people as to what constitutes great change depending on who is their favorite at the moment. To call the reaction to the match great would be fair. To call the match great would be cheapening the standard set by every great match Flair had over the previous 20 years. The match on this day in this building was going to be great to the audience live and on pay-per-view so long as Flair didn't break his leg and won at the end. And so it was, by that standard. If it was any other six guys doing the exact same match, people would recognize that the only real wrestling in the entire match was provided by Six. In some ways this wasn't all that different from all those Hulk Hogan vs. John Studd and King Kong Bundy matches in Hogan's prime, in that the fans live thought they were good matches so long as Hogan didn't break his leg when he fell down from that leg drop and won at the end, not to say this match was that bad. When Flair talked about Dick the Bruiser in St. Louis in his mid-50s, he was talking about a fan reality. In Charlotte or anywhere in the Carolinas, Flair will still be the biggest draw and most popular star if he chooses to be, in the year 2003, even if he becomes Dick the Bruiser in terms of ring ability. A pay-per-view main event against Hogan for the title, despite the cringes that sound has for many within the company, is still probably the biggest money match the company could put on with the exception of Hogan vs. Sting. You may say Flair's interviews are out of touch or out of style. But they were still better than Bruiser or Crushers were when they were drawing big money and a hell of a lot less mobile at an older age. Hey, Sinatra can still draw money today, and in this business, Flair is Sinatra. A bigger star today as long as he works in small doses than he was in the day he really was the best. This show, as with most WCW pay-per-view events, had a strong undercard. Nothing off the charts, but most matches were as good if not better than they figured to be on paper. It also featured easily the worst match of this or many other years, the Steve McMichael-Reggie White fiasco. Terry Taylor, who trained McMichael and Green for their match with Flair and Arnold Anderson last summer, pulled off a miracle. Well, maybe it wasn't a miracle because of the divine intervention on the other side of the ring. But lightning didn't strike a second time in a different place. White may have put on the single worst performance on a major pay-per-view show since the legends of grown-up Danny Partridge and Peter Brady in a dark match in Chicago. But the match did garner the expected media publicity for WCW, with coverage that night on both CNN and ESPN Sports Reports and in the May 19th USA Today. Yuji Nagata pinned Pat Tanaka in about 4:30 after a belly-to-belly suplex and a spin wheel kick. This match was said to have been too short to be either good or bad, and there was no crowd reaction. Public Enemy, Ted Petty and Mike Durham, beat Harlem Heat, Lane and Booker Huffman, in about 6 minutes when Booker T crotched himself on the top rope and fell into the ring, and was pinned by Johnny Grunge. This was said to have been real bad. 1. Steve Regal, Darren Matthews, regained the WCW TV title from Ultimo Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, in 1604. Hey, isn't the TV title only supposed to be up for the first 10 minutes? From a technical standpoint, this was heads and shoulders above anything else on the show. A slight bit of sloppiness prevented it from reaching the excellent level, but it was very close to that level with the expected great mat work on both sides. Much of the match was spent teasing a Dragon/Sonny Ono breakup. From the very start, as when Ono shot the photo of the two of them together as they were coming to the ring, Dragon winced as if the flash got him in the eyes. Regal needs to drop a few pounds or buy some larger trunks. Dragon laid in great kicks. Dragon dominated early on the mat. Dusty Rhodes and Bobby Heenan, who were clearly watching a different match after Dragon dominated about 80%, were talking about how Regal is controlling the entire match on the mat. Fans cheered for Regal as the babyface. By the way, Regal has dropped the Lord Steven Regal gimmick and is doing something of a shoot wrestler serious gimmick. At one point Ono started kicking Regal outside the ring, which got Dragon mad. There was a great pop when Regal kicked out of a Frankensteiner off the top. He missed a moonsault and Regal went for the Regal stretch, but Dragon sold it great as a finisher and went to the ropes. In a great spot, Regal went for a double-arm suplex, but Dragon turned it into a Hurricane Rana for a near fall. They went back and forth with near falls. Dragon missed a plancha, but after reversing a guardrail whip, hit his Asai moonsault. Ono threw more kicks and Dragon again stopped him. Ono kicked Dragon and then Regal put Dragon away with a reverse vertical suplex and the Regal stretch for the submission. 3 3/4 stars. 2. Medusa, Deborah Ann Michelli, pinned Luna Vachon, Gertrude Vachon, in 5:09 with a German suplex. This match was billed as the winner to get a title shot at Akira Hokuto. The women's title picture makes no sense to an outsider. Lee Marshall explained that Ono claims that Hokuto is still the champion because no match ever happened, but then said that we know Ono doesn't always tell the truth. Now what is that supposed to mean to a fan? We know that no match actually took place, but since WCW on its television announced a title switch in a specific match, it's pretty ridiculous to then say there wasn't a match, but then hint that there was. While the two aren't what you'd call great or even good workers, the match was short and they worked hard and stiff. Both were trying to show as much skin as possible since that's what promoters perceive audiences want from women in wrestling nowadays, and based on what's being served currently, they're correct. But that makes it almost impossible to take them seriously from a wrestling standpoint, so people dismiss these matches even when they have something to offer. Medusa threw a great spin kick and Luna took a great bump off a clothesline. 1 1/2 star. Randy Savage came out for an interview. Diamond Dallas Page with a crutch came through the crowd to attack him, but Savage ran. The NWOB team came out with Savage. Eventually Savage told them to all go to the side, including calling Vincent Virgil his WWF name. Savage ran to the ring and Page momentarily destroyed him with the crutch. Marcus Bagwell, Vincent and Eric Bischoff hit the ring, but Page nailed them as well until Scott Norton cut Page off. They ripped his shirt off, revealing taped ribs, and stomped the hell out of his ribs until the Giant made the save. The angle got a ton of heat. 3. Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez, pinned Yuji Ryoka in 14:58 with a springboard Hurricane Rana. Mysterio Jr. did a great job carrying a fairly green wrestler from the War promotion here to a good match. They worked Japanese style so the fans didn't understand a lot of the mat work and submissions. While Mike Tenay did a great job of getting the strategy of Yasuhiro working on Mysterio's arm over and tried to explain the style, Tony Schiavone nearly killed them dead in their tracks by saying that Mysterio Jr. would never submit. For one, when an announcer tells the fans that a wrestler will never submit, it turns every wrestling hold inherently into a wrist hold and creates an environment where wrestlers without main event personas can only do high spots to get the crowd interested. Even dumber is that Mysterio Jr. submitted twice in recent weeks to basically shoulder locks, 6 Buzzkiller, on Nitro. Mysterio Jr. teased he was going to do a big dive but ref Mark Curtis got in the way. Then he did a running flip dive over Curtis onto Yasuhiro which was tremendous. He did a springboard but was caught by a low kick by Yasuhiro, who then punished him with a Wakigatami, Fujiwara armbar. When Mike Tenay mentioned that Yasuhiro was the tag team partner of Lance Storm in Japan, Bobby Heenan displaying his knowledge of the current wrestling scene saying it sounded like a weatherman from Omaha. Yasuhiro continued to work the arm with an arm breaker and did a rope climb into a double sledge off the top rope to the floor. Mysterio Jr. came back with a split-legged moonsault for a near fall and a power bomb. He missed a splash off the top and Yasuhiro used his double-arm DDT finisher for a near fall. He tried it a second time but Mysterio Jr. reversed it into a Northern Lights suplex for a near fall. The two blew a reverse whip spot before Mysterio Jr. caught Yasuhiro coming off the ropes with a dropkick and used his springboard Hurricane Rana finisher. 3¼ stars. 4. Glacier, Ray Lloyd, beat Mortis, Chris Cluseritis, via DQ in 151 due to outside interference of Wrath, Brian Clark. Glacier went into the match with an ankle injury suffered in training working out this match, so they had to keep it short and simple. There was nothing wrong with what they did, it just was too short with a shit finish. Fans were chanting bullshit after the match. Mortis did a nice spot where he basically sat on the back of Glacier's head, driving his face into the ring steps. James Vandenberg slapped Glacier as well. As Wrath went for the urinage suplex, Ernest Miller, a kickboxing champion who has worked a few matches on the syndicated tapings, hit the ring and began throwing all kinds of great-looking kicks on Mortis and Wrath. Dud. 5. Dean Malenko of Dean Simon retained the U.S. title beating Jeff Jarrett in 1503. Even though this is the heart of Horseman country, they booed Jarrett out of the building. Solid work and it built into a good match. Fans really resented when Jarrett used the figure 4, I guess feeling that only Flair can do that move. Malenko threw punches for probably the first time on a pay-per-view and in doing so, finally exposed a weakness in his arsenal. Finish saw a weak forehead collision with Jarrett on the ground. As Deborah McMichael hovered over Jarrett, Steve McMichael came out, got mad, threw Jarrett in the ring and dragged Deborah out. Malenko hit a Tiger Driver and used the Texas Cloverleaf for the submission. 3 stars. 6. Mang Yuli Fifita beat Chris Benoit in what was billed as a death match in 1454. There was tons of talk internally all week in regard to Kevin Sullivan's departure and how the guy who would be affected the most from a negative standpoint was Benoit, who Sullivan always featured and protected since he was his personal opponent. The feeling was a feud with Mang, who isn't over and is much larger, would kill Benoit. This match did nothing to quell that belief. Mang wasn't the slightest bit over when he came out despite how hard they've pushed his killer gimmick on television. Benoit was over like crazy. The crowd reacted whenever Benoit was on a fence and died when Mang was on a fence, and the finish left the whole place deflated. Since the idea is a long-term program, Mang needed the win for credibility, but it didn't work because as tough as he is in real life, the fans at home don't know it, and when they're told on television, it doesn't register because they've seen him as a faceless jobber for too long. Benoit was phenomenal in this match, which he got more mileage out of Mang in a single than anyone since Mang came to WCW. He built it into a dramatic match that would have had a great pop for the finish had he won. It was also worked Japanese style with a lot of submissions and rope breaks. Benoit looked very small next to Mang. Benoit hit some great German suplexes, including a rolling German, and several times went for his crippler crossface submission, but Mang always made the ropes. There was no crowd reaction to Benoit's finisher. The announcers tried to say Benoit has won thousands of matches with that move, even though he's only used it for a few weeks. Benoit hit a tope and went to the top, but Mang swept the legs. Benoit came back with another German suplex off the ropes and came off the top with a diving headbutt, but Mang caught him with the throat nerve hold called the Tongan Death Grip for the victory. 2¾ stars. 7. Rick and Scott Steiner, Robert and Scott Reach Steiner beat Conan, Carlos Charles Ashenoff Espada, and Hugh Morris, William DeMott, in 9:35. Morris worked most of the match. Steiners did a lot of good suplexes, but a lot of the match was pretty sloppy. Ric almost missed the top rope bulldog on Morris completely. After Morris missed a moonsault on Ric, Scott hit him with a Frankensteiner. The first time he's done that move that he's the one who popularized it, in recent memory, leading to Ric's pin. After the match, Conan turned on Morris, leaving him laying with a DDT, and walked out on Jimmy Hart, essentially quitting the Dungeon of Doom. 1 3/4 stars. 8. Steve McMichael pinned Reggie White in 15-17. Whoever got the idea that these two could go 15 minutes needs to be sent back to the sanitarium. The two basically had a match worked out for them. First few minutes were just walking and talking and doing no-sell tackle spots. After White delivered perhaps the worst-looking clothesline in wrestling history that McMichael had to sell, McMichael walked out. However, Gilbert Brown, a 380-pound lineman on the Packers, picked McMichael up and threw him back into the ring. White threw a decent-looking dropkick. McMichael started pounding on Reverend Reggie and said, "Jesus may have your soul, but I've got your ass." White then turned it around and began telling McMichael he needs to go to church, but McMichael hit a low blow. Crowd died at this point. A signal was sent from the back to tell the guys to go home, but since they had their match worked out and weren't into improvising, they didn't listen. At this point it was the blind leading the blind. McMichael had to sell the most pathetic offense on a major wrestling show in recent memory. Finish wasn't too bad as McMichael went to use the briefcase thrown in by Deborah, but Brown grabbed it away from him. Jarrett showed up with a second briefcase and threw it to McMichael, who clocked White with it for the pin. -2 stars. 9. Ric Flair, Richard Fleer, and Roddy Piper, Roderick Toombs, and Kevin Green beat Scott Hall and Kevin Nash in 6, Sean Waltman, in 17-20. Green didn't get nearly the pop you'd think coming out for the local sports hero, but Flair and Piper's pop more than made up for it. Flair's left shoulder and arm clearly weren't close to 100%. 6 did a great job in this match in both working and getting heat. Flair didn't do much except a few trademark spots and the chops, but naturally everything he did was over like crazy since this was his night. Piper did a little more than usual, and Green, in his second pro match, continued to show a lot of potential. It was mainly a comedy match, and Nash proved clairvoyant when all was said and done when he said that they needed 6 to make the match. Piper KO'd ref Randy Anderson, leading to Nick Patrick coming out. Flair put Hall in the figure 4, then Piper put Nash in the sleeper and Green power slammed 6. With all 3 down, Patrick counted Hall's shoulders down. The pop was deafening for the clean finish. 2.5 stars. The dominoes kept falling this week, leaving the future of no-holds-barred fighting on pay-per-view in the gravest of situations. After TCI officially turned down the attempts by both fans of NHB and by Semaphore Entertainment Group to get the company to reconsider its ban on allowing its systems to carry future shows, an even bigger blow followed when Request Television informed Semaphore Entertainment Group that after the May 30th show, it would no longer carry future events due to the fact that so many of the systems it carries programming for, roughly 50% or more of the system's Request serves, wasn't going to be airing the shows. It is believed that Jones Cable, another of the nation's largest conglomerates, had followed in the footsteps of Cablevision, TCI and Time Warner Cable in deciding not to carry Ultimate Fighting Championship pay-per-view shows after the next program. For those keeping track with a scorecard, Cablevision, TCI and some Time Warner systems won't be carrying the May 30th show. The remainder of the Time Warner systems, Jones and Request, are pulling out after the next show. Due to the lack of penetration into the pay-per-view universe, it is nearly impossible to see any kind of a bright future for the Ultimate Fighting Championships, coming on the heels of the folding of the Extreme Fighting Championships for exactly the same reason. Leo Hindery Jr., the president of TCI, wrote a letter on May 14 to Bob Merowitz, the CEO of Semaphore, the parent company of UFC, stating, "Thanks for the constructive effort you and your colleagues have made to meet some of our objections to carriage by TCI of Ultimate Fighting Championship events. However, we have decided to maintain our current position regarding carriage of the telecasts. A primary reason for our decision is that states in which TCI has millions of customers do not allow the events to be held within their jurisdictions. This is a clear indication that regulatory authorities in these states consider the events inappropriate given their current format. The long-term solution obviously is to seek the type of widespread state sanctioning that is common for other athletic events of this type. Please keep us informed if you make progress in this regard." Merowitz and Semaphore Entertainment Group had been in heavy negotiations for weeks with Hindery, to the point that Merowitz had been heavily praising one of his longtime critics in the media. Semaphore Entertainment Group, however, numerous rule concessions in an attempt to get TCI to reverse its position and was actually fairly confident of a reversal, which would be a major victory at a time the company needed one, so the news hit like a ton of bricks. While we are not aware of all of them, one of them was to make wearing gloves mandatory in UFC matches and certain types of strikes were going to be banned. There will be no rule changes for the May 30th show, but it is expected there will be significant changes in an attempt to get cable companies to reverse their positions and attempt to get boxing commissions in key states to sanction the events, which is apparently what the industry leader, TCI, is wanting before the July 27th show. That's another political problem because of the heavy boxing influence in most of the key commissions, which simply don't want this around, as the actions of the commission in New York showed by implementing the ridiculous last-minute rule book to kill the February event. What the new rules will be haven't been finalized at press time, but it is believed they'll include both mandatory gloves and banning attacking the fingers, a tactic which has never been used in a UFC fight up to this point anyway. Semaphore Entertainment Group is still working on doing a follow-up show on July 27th, rumored to be in Mobile, Alabama, after the attempts to run a show in Japan on that date fell through. After doing the math, Semaphore Entertainment Group feels the show will still be available in 17 million homes because at present, Viewer's Choice is the carrier of choice in 61% of the pay-per-view universe in the United States. With scaling back costs, it is still enough homes to make the show potentially viable if the buy rate is decent. There is talk of running a show later this year in Russia, and perhaps still going to Japan by the end of the year as well. Running a show from a foreign country is only going to result in an overall more expensive production coming at the same time. Semaphore Entertainment Group is said to be reworking the budgets, so the next show should be scaled way back from a production and talent standpoint. While these dominoes have all fallen in recent weeks, the die had been cast months ago. At a national cable convention, one leading pro wrestling promoter had informed us that the talk of the convention was that UFC and EFC were done. They saw the pattern with buy rates no longer being what they were, combined with the fate of cable in the hands of a committee empowered by Senator John McCain of Arizona, that it would be the politically wise move to jump off the NHB bandwagon. David Isaacs, who heads the UFC division for Semaphore Entertainment Group, said that the letter sent by National Cable Television Association President Decker Antrim 2 weeks ago urging all the cable operators to pull out of carrying NHB events was a potent factor in the dominoes falling, far more than he realized at the time the letter went out. Our buy rates have been good, but not great, but the others, EFC, Mars, have been crappy, Isaac said. These changes have made it so the other events aren't going to be able to continue. By getting rid of the other events, the buy rates for the entire genre are going to start looking better. The fact is, in a court of public media and private opinion, UFC and its competitors had always fared poorly. While they could continue to point to the lack of serious injuries in the competition as compared to numerous other sports, they were constantly haunted by their own over-the-top promotions before running afoul of political and media problems promising the bloodiest, most violent sport around, and their own promotional bragging about it being banned in so many states during the early days of the genre when it actually wasn't banned anywhere. That kind of hype likely led to buy rates rapidly escalating in the sport's early days. UFC gained popularity initially under the guise that they were pitting champions from various combat sports and putting them in a tournament to see not only who the toughest fighter in the world is, but is the best fighting style. Even from the start, credentials of fighters were exaggerated and even created out of thin air in some cases, and the early successful shows turned into a commercial for the wonders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as practiced by unbeaten champion Royce Gracie, who made himself the biggest martial arts star on the planet through winning 3 of the first 4 tournaments. But as the years went on, it became apparent that the key issues that drew curiosity in the early shows were no longer there. Ironically, for the most part, the quality of the fighters has increased greatly from the early shows, but the public generally doesn't recognize that and has still seen star after star from UFC walk away without being clearly beaten and sees the current crop as second-rate in comparison to the early stars. Nobody was kidding anyone any longer that the winner of a UFC tournament gave a guy a legitimate claim to being the toughest man alive or proof of a superior fighting style. While most of the shows were well received by people who bought the shows, with no outside hype mechanism and little done to create and make stars, the novelty noticeably began wearing thin in 1996, which some blame on the Dan Severn vs. Ken Shamrock match in May, although that would be far too simplistic an explanation. The fact is, creating a new viable sport is never easy, and even when UFC was drawing the monster buy rates in 1995, the media rated it as a level below tough man contests on their respectability scale. For long-term success as something other than a novelty, it either needed to be able to control its own hype, like pro wrestling, or to be treated in the media as a serious and important sport, thus getting the benefit of that kind of hype. Their own contradictions on the glove issue, which UFC officials and its spokesperson when in political jams, referee John McCarthy, would point out the lack of gloves inherently make the matches safer, yet the fact was they did allow competitors to wear gloves and it did turn the matches into bloodier and less technical bouts. While UFC talked about having Olympic-caliber medal wrestlers and top-caliber martial artists on its shows, the competitions were also stacked in many cases with fighters who obviously didn't belong, chosen above the numerous world-class wrestlers and judo players that had expressed interest in competing. At times the company seemed to want to run tournaments and title matches to set up what its fan base wanted, to find out who the toughest man alive was, although none ever worked out exactly as hoped for. At times the company seemed to have an attitude of putting almost anyone in and that the public would pay to see the UFC name, with the idea of doing tournaments with a few big names and rounding out the tournament with guys who didn't have a prayer. Once it became clear that the wrestlers were dominating the field, numerous world-class wrestlers, Tom Erickson in particular, were avoided because of the thought, in his case, he didn't look right, was too much like another Dan Severn, and because in reality few thought that there was anyone around who could beat him and they were afraid of him being a dominant force. While publicly trying to portray themselves as a mixed martial arts contest, the company continually attempted to build and push Tank Abbott because of his charisma, but who also was the flesh and blood representative of everything their critics claimed they were. While Abbott came out of UFC's most successful event, a July 1995 show in Casper, Wyoming, as its most talked about fighter, a September 1996 show built around Abbott's return, which was geared toward a match between he and Mark Coleman that never happened, drew UFC's weakest buy rate to date. Isaacs has continually maintained that Semaphore Entertainment Group is in the UFC for the long haul, and that as satellite dishes grow in popularity, there will come a time that they'll be able to be in enough homes without having to worry about cable companies and cable carriers. But those days aren't soon, even under the most optimistic of projections, and with lower quality shows due to budgetary cutbacks on the horizon, and less exposure in much of the country, realistically the genre won't be able to maintain even its current level of interest even if that day arrives in a few years. Isaacs is confident, however, that with a lot of outside publicity in recent weeks for UFC, from being featured in 2 episodes of Friends, which finished number 4 in the ratings in the episode where Abbott has a brief cameo, on MTV, the Learning Channel, and expected strong hype over the next few weeks on WWF television, that the May 30th show will produce a solid number. On the drawing board for July 27th is a Coleman vs. Maurice Smith title match and 2 tournaments. Coleman has indicated to several people that this may be his last UFC match, and he'd certainly have to go into a match with Smith as the odds-on favorite, which would mean yet another in the series of the top star in UFC leaving without a new star gaining the necessary credibility to be a top gun of beating a top gun. The plan for the heavyweight tournament would be to have Abbott, win or lose in his May 30th match with Vitor Belfort that most insiders feel he isn't going to win, face Frank Shamrock in the first round. The problem is that Shamrock is about 195 to 200 pounds in fighting shape, so in a sport with weight classes, why is he in the heavyweight tournament instead of the light heavyweight? Moti Hornstein, who lost a first-round match to Coleman in July 1996, will be in the other bracket, which is another of those questionable political whys, and they are considering former EFC champion Conan Silveira for the final slot. The light heavyweight tournament will crown a champion, with Jerry Bollander and the winner of the May 30th tourney invited plus 2 others, with Yoshiki Takahashi's name being discussed as a possibility. Puerto Rico. The Invader #1 Trompetilla, Raymond Arrieta, angle came to its conclusion on Arrieta's television show on May 6. Invader said he was going to teach Trompetilla not to throw water at his guests on his TV show. The whole television angle was done in comedy, with WWC television announcers El Profe and Eluid Gonzalez at ringside with a ring acting as if it was a match. Trompetilla, who wears a clown outfit, came out wearing a mask, and was obviously not the original character. They did the match with heel manager Rico Suave, Julio Estrada, managing Trompetilla, who was unmasked, revealing WWC prelim heel Chuck Singer. The real Trompetilla came out with a roll and began choking Suave and Singer and threw water on Suave. He claimed he was betrayed by Suave and that's why he saved Invader, and promised that he would never throw water on his guests anymore on his television show. The problems with Huracan Castillo have already been settled and Castillo has been rehired. Before being fired, Castillo did drop the Puerto Rican title to Ray Gonzalez on April 27 in Cabo Rojo. Castillo had been contacted by Savio Vega about doing some WWF shots but had no direct contact with the Titan office, but apparently is only interested in doing so if it wouldn't jeopardize his spot with WWC, which runs opposition to Vega's WWA. Vega is likely trying to get wrestlers into WWF as a way to bring them into WWA, similar to how Conan has gotten wrestlers into Promo Azteca and Antonio Pena got Hector Garza originally to AAA because of the ability to make the connection into a higher-paying American office. Sean Morley has already jumped back from WWA back to WWC. Both the Freebirds and Headhunters no-show the book dates, likely because they were never booked. Hunters had been working in Mexico and Freebirds, of course, no longer exist. Abdullah the Butcher and the Bushwhackers have returned. The big angle of the week is that Carlos Colon announced he would be vacating the Universal title permanently after the current series of bouts with Chiqui Star. They had a title match in Humacao which saw a ref bump and Colon used the figure 4. As Colon went to help the ref, Victor the Bodyguard, who was handcuffed to former area wrestling legend Victor Jovica, threw powder in Jovica's eyes and gave Star brass knucks, and Star used them, leading to the win. Jovica then put Victor in a sleeper and left him laying. Star attacked Jovica but Colon made the save. Star left with the title belt but the commissioner reversed the decision, giving Colon back the title. Colon and Star did a lengthy television interview last week building up their 2 matches. Colon said he was going to vacate the strap, claiming the Universal title forces him to travel all over the world, and he wanted to dedicate more time to his family. He said he wanted to make clear he wasn't retiring and would still lead the Justice Army, the babyface group, against Devastation Incorporated, IL Group. He said not having the belt would allow him to spend more time protecting the other faces, and that there were a lot of young wrestlers whose goal is to win the Universal title but were reluctant to challenge him for the belt, so he believes he's been standing in their way. Colon said he had won the title 15 times during his career. EMLL major show of the week was May 16th at Arena Coliseo with Headhunters and Apollo Dantes beating Atlantis and La Fiera and Takamichi Noku, the latter making his debut. He looked good in his babyface role. The semi had Ultimo Dragon and Negro Casas and Felino over Gran Marcus Jr. and Violencia and Silver King in a match not as good as it sounds because Marcus was terrible and Violencia wasn't much better. Promo Azteca. The biggest news appears to be the jump of Hector Garza. Garza, who began a heel turn with AAA, which apparently was something he didn't want to do, was in Asheville, North Carolina on May 19th for Nitro. He didn't work the show but was at the show, which pretty much signifies a jump to this office. Garza had jumped from EMLL to AAA largely due to the promises he was given that by jumping he would end up with a WWF contract. When that didn't materialize, he jumped here since it came with a WCW contract offer. Several other big names are being seriously negotiated with about coming in. All the magazines are reporting on Black Warrior coming here, which still hasn't happened, and Conan even talked about it on the television show. Warrior is in Japan for the next few weeks for Big Japan and is expected to come in after the tour. Mora Promotions ran Tijuana on May 16th, drawing 4,400 fans for what was described as a so-so show. They had a 16-man Survivor Series rules elimination match with the face team of Vampiro Canadiense and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Lismark and Mascara Sagrada and Arandu and Pandillero 1 and Magico and El Psicodelico beating Fishman and Cien Caras and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 and Phobia and Haystacks Brothers 1 and 2, Wayne Bradley and Adam Kroon, and Mr. Tempest. It came down to Rayo beating Fishman in the finals of a match that went 50 minutes and was said to be not good at all. The announced rules at the beginning were that the final 2 men were going to have a 2 out of 3 fall match, but instead they just gave it to Rayo at the end. The main event was a strange one with Rey Mysterio and Rey Mysterio Jr. teaming up for the first time in a few years because they've been on opposite sides of a bitter promotional war against El Hijo del Santo and Misterioso. Even though Mysterio is something of a local hero and Mysterio Jr. is the local kid who turned into a worldwide superstar, the crowd was still 60% pro Santo against both race. The deal is that on June 6th in Tijuana there was to be a triangle mask and/or hair match involving 3 of these 4 wrestlers, and they'd do a tag match, and then the winning team would wrestle a singles match against each other with the ultimate winner excluded from the triangle match. The tag was said to have been pretty good and ended with the race DQ'd, meaning both are in the triangle match. This put Santo versus Misterioso in a singles match, which Santo won in about 5 minutes of a good match, so the triangle bout will be the 2 Race and Misterioso, which has a good local storyline because Misterioso was originally Rey Mysterio 2 before Rey Mysterio Jr. came along and they changed his name. It's weird because Misterioso is the only heel, so with uncle and nephew against him, it would almost make him psychologically the face, especially since he's going to lose at the end. Don't be shocked to see Rey Sr. turn on Rey Jr. to start a feud. Actually, they put a lot of heat on building to a single Santo vs. Ray Jr. match for the WWA welterweight title that Santo beat Ray for as the two issued challenges back and forth. It now appears the outdoor stadium show won't be until July. Not sure what year, just July. Major weekend show was May 16th in Xochimilco with Conan and La Parca and Tarzan Boy vs. Blue Panther and Psicosis and Pantera del Ring and Lizmark Jr. and Zorro and Gitano vs. Juventud Guerrera and Damien and Shu El Guerrero. AAA. Latest on Triple Mania, which changes by the day, is that the first TM will be May 31st in Juarez, the second on June 13th in Tijuana and the third in late June, probably June 27th, at El Toreo in Naucalpan. No idea on any of the matches at this point. The All for Naught Hector Garza turn took place on May 11th and May 12th at TV tapings in Iguala and Toluca. The first night was Pentagon and Fuerza Guerrera and Abismo Negro beat Garza and Venom and Heavy Metal in 2 straight falls, with Garza subtly getting mad at Venom, who lost both of the falls. The next night Garza teamed with Supernova in a tag team tournament. In their semifinal match against Guerrera and Mosco de la Merced, Nova did a drop kick off the top rope aimed at Fuerza, who moved, and it hit Garza, who was then double-teamed and submitted. After losing, Garza attacked Nova. Venom then ran in to help Nova, which totally killed the angle live since Garza was supposed to be the heel and now it's 2-on-1, so the crowd went silent and there was no heat for the turn. A few years ago Pena screwed up a Blue Panther turn at the Los Angeles Sports Arena with the exact same deal. Metal ran in to even things up, but Garza got mad at him as well, to signify it was Garza turning heel and not a babyface feud. Mosco and Fuerza won the tourney, beating Metal and Venom due to a heel ref gimmick with Tirantes. Metal had Fuerza in a submission, but Tirantes pretended he had an ear problem and thus couldn't hear the submission. Later, when Venom was in a submission, Tirantes called for the bell, stopping the match to protect Venom. The main event on that show turned into another of those Steve Austin-Shawn Michaels deals. This also actually started the night before as Razor Ramon and Diesel and Jake Roberts, who did show up this week, beat Connect and Cibernetico and Latin Lover. Unlike last week, this time Cibernetico and Connect started feuding again, with Cibernetico giving Connect a low blow, leading to Roberts pinning him. The next night main event was Pierre Roth Jr. and the Destroyer, no idea who, facing Connect and Cibernetico. The two faces didn't get along at all in the first 2 falls. First the heels destroyed Connect and Cibernetico was on the apron laughing about it. When Cibernetico got in, the situation was reversed and Connect starting laughing as he was bleeding. Finally, in the second fall, after being pounded the whole match, the two shook hands as if they were going to team up, but then Cibernetico turned on Connect again. With Connect getting destroyed, Metal made the save for him, but Garza came out and attacked Metal. Connect then tried to break up Metal and Garza's brawl, but in doing so Connect and Garza ended up going at it. They had a major show on May 18th in Monterrey, which was to honor Humberto Garza Sr., Hector Garza's father, and the original Blue Demon, who were actually bitter rivals in that city during both's career. All Japan. The new tour opened on May 17th in Ishioka and ran May 18th in Korakuen Hall. Korakuen Hall was headlined by Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace and the Patriot, beating Takao Mori and Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao in 2024 when Patriot pinned Mori after a power bomb. After the match, Kobashi announced that he, Ace and Patriot are going to work together as a regular trio to feud with Kawada's team, Mitsuharu Misawa's team, and with the other foreigners as well, which seems to signify a breakup of the Steve Williams and Johnny Ace team. Williams has been teaming now with the Lacrosse, Jim Steele, and to show All Japan wants to get them over as a regular team, they beat Misawa and Jun Akiyama at Korakuen Hall in just 4:40 when Williams pinned Akiyama with the backdrop driver. May 11th TV show did a 3.8 rating. New Japan. New Japan announced all the non-junior heavyweight matches for the June 5th show at Budokan Hall, which comes one day before All Japan runs the same building with the Misawa vs. Kawada Triple Crown match. New Japan is putting its most attractive main event on the show, with Shinya Hashimoto defending the IWGP heavyweight title against Keiji Muto, who is expected to turn heel and join the NWO next week. Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi defend the tag titles against the returning Masahiro Chono and NWO Sting, plus a Legends match with Tiger King, Satoru Sayama, versus Kunyaki Kobayashi, who had one of the all-time legendary junior heavyweight feuds in 1982 to 1983. Also Riki Choshu and Tadao Yasuda versus Kengo Kimura and Takashi Ishikawa, Tatsume Fujinami and Kensuke Sasaki versus Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara, Junji Hirata and Takashi Iizuka vs Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito, Kazuo Yamazaki and Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Wrestling Without the Mask and the Kendo Kashi Name, versus Kazuyuki Fujita and Osamu Kido, plus the finals of the Super Junior tournament. Muto, Antonio Inoki, Sayama, Naoya Ogawa and Fujita didn't go to Slambroree after all. Muto stayed in Japan and is working the current tour, but will be leaving this week to appear as Great Muta on Nitro on May 26. The rest didn't go to Charlotte because it was said Ogawa was injured, but they are all now in Minneapolis training with Brad Rheingans. New Japan originally wanted Ogawa to wrestle every night on this tour. I don't know where the work begins and ends on this story, but the press is playing it up as if there is a power play for Ogawa between Inoki and New Japan, with Inoki wanting him to be pushed as a martial arts star and do a few shows a year, while New Japan wants him to turn into a pro wrestler and be a top attraction on the tours, working every night because of the belief he has the potential to be a good worker. Since he's not even booked on the Budokan show, it says that he's going to wind up in the role booked originally for Ken Shamrock as a Dome show attraction, as his next match looks to be on August 10th at the Nagoya Dome. There are rumors going around of an Ogawa vs Don Fry match for Budokan Hall. The best of the Super Juniors tournament started on May 16th in Kiryu before a sellout 2,500 with Yoshihiro Tajiri pinning Scorpio Jr. in 9:16 with a Hurricane Rana and Jushin Liger pinning Chavo Guerrero Jr. in 10:20 with a Liger bomb. May 17th in Ueda before a sellout 2,300 saw Tatsuhito Takaiwa pin Dr. Wagner Jr. in 9:53 with 3 power bombs, Shinjiro Otani pin Hanzo Nakajima with a Dragon Suplex, and El Samurai pin Tajiri in 13:42 with his reverse implant DDT. May 18th in Kamagane before a sellout 1,700 saw Chris Jericho pin Scorpio Jr. in 11:16 with the moonsault, and Samurai pinned Robbie Brookside in 11:32 with a Samurai bomb. Hiro Saito and Tenzan and NWO Sting worked as the main eventers in New Japan vs NWO matches on all 3 shows. May 10th TV show, which was headlined by the Hashimoto vs Ogawa Osaka Dome match, drew a 4.2 rating, which is excellent for the 2 a.m. time slot. Other Japan notes. The Nobuhiko Tada vs Hickson Gracie match was officially cancelled this past week after several of the sponsors pulled out. Kingdom Promotions announced its second card on June 20th with Yoji Anjo vs Kazushi Sakuraba as the main event and Yoshihiro Takayama vs Masahito Kakihara. Takada won't wrestle on the show, but instead do the television announcing. Saw clips from the first Kingdom show and it's obviously a worked UFC style. It's different from traditional UWF style in that they wear gloves and thus do lots of punching spots, both standing and on the ground, from the mount. Based on the clips I saw, the style was totally cool. It was a totally new version of worked style that got heat and looked believable, except the punches are pulled, but they sell the punches like pro wrestling. Anjo vs Kakihara appeared to be twice as good as Shamrock vs Vader. All Japan Women, which has had occasional major show television coverage on the Fuji network, will now have a regular monthly special on the final Sunday of every month. After the 2 nights in Sapporo, the next major show will be August 20th at Budokan Hall, then September 21st in Kawasaki Gym and October 18th in Yokohama Bunka Gym. Whatever they are going to do with their Triple Crown World title after Kyoko Inoue vacated it after the 60 minutes draw with Kaoru Ito will take place on the June 17th Sapporo show. Tarzan Goto's first show of his new group called Real FMW on June 17th in Kawasaki will be a 6-match card, with Goto wrestling in all 6 matches, 3 singles and 3 tags, including a barbed wire board match. Katsutoshi Niyama has jumped from FMW to this group to be Goto's main rival. 7 promotions are combining for the second Women's Dream and Future show on July 19th at Yokohama Bunka Gym. The first show last year in Tokyo was a huge success, drawing a sellout, using undercard younger women from all the different groups as a way to focus on the younger wrestlers to promote the future. There will be 36 wrestlers appearing on the show, including AJW, LLPW, GIA, Social Pro Wrestling Federation, JWP, JD, and Big Japan. War is attempting to use 3 ECW matches on its July 6th show at Sumo Hall. Paul Heyman is pretty adamant about not doing any interpromotional matches, whether it be in the US or in Japan, so the idea of a show with ECW versus FMW, which FMW talked about for next year, isn't likely to happen other than Tommy Dreamer and Wing Kanemura having some kind of a major match. War is doing a gimmick match where company president Masatomo Takei, who is Tenryu's brother-in-law and was attacked by Goto, will wrestle. Takei teams with Tenryu and Nobutaka Araya vs Goto and Ryo Mike in a 2-on-3 match on June 6th at Korakuen Hall. Takei weighs about 140 pounds. FMW on May 13 at Korakuen Hall had a retirement ceremony for Megumi Kudo, who had her final match on the April 29 Yokohama Big Show. Atsushi Onita wrestled at Korakuen Hall teaming with Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda to beat Wing Kanemura and Haido and Dragon Winger in the main event. After the match, Onita announced that he would face Kanemura in a gimmick match at the September 29 Kawasaki Stadium show. JWP is promoting two shows built around the idea of the beginning of the 20th year of the career of Devil Masami, which would be the longest career of any Japanese woman wrestler in history. The memorial show will be June 8 at Yokohama Bunka Gym with Masami and Chigusa Nagio and Tomoko Miyaguchi and Meiko Satomura vs Mayumi Ozaki and Rieko Amano and Sugar Sato and Chikeo Nagashima. They'll have a follow-up on June 15 at Korakuen Hall where Masami will join forces with Jaguar Yokota against Dynamite Kansai and Candy Akutsu. Yokota and Masami were the leading rivals of the Crush Gals in 1982-83, which was the feud that put the Crush Gals on the map as the greatest women's tag team attraction in history. Masami, 35, actually started her career on August 21, 1978. USWA Brian Christopher was temporarily fired last week after some sort of a problem with general manager Larry Burton. Christopher missed television on May 10 at a couple of the house shows, but in midweek, everything was patched up. Supposedly Burton was agitating Christopher's girlfriend and Christopher lost his temper on him, but it wound up all worked out, although Christopher apparently, as part of the punishment, had to do a job on television to Ox Brody on May 17. Bill Dundee is also gone, having joined the rival North American All-Star Wrestling group run by Burt Prentice, where PG-13, Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, all former stars of this group who kind of carried the promotion the past few years, are now working. Stephen Dunn and Paul Diamond won the USWA tag titles from the Truth Commission in West Helena, Arkansas on May 14. A rematch was held on television for 2 out of 3 falls, which Dunn and Diamond won via outside interference DQ. Lance Russell wasn't there again on May 17, which was one of the better television shows in a while, with them doing the angle he wouldn't come out as long as Dutch Mantle was around. To say he was missed would be an understatement, since Michael St. John was so out of it that he called Johnny Rotten, a Sid Vicious lookalike, Mabel, since apparently it was Mabel's name on the sheet, but still, he should have easily been able to figure out the difference. The biggest angle involved Razor Ramon, Rick Bogner. He was confronted by USWA heels Mike Samples and the Truth Commission, who were feuding last week but were together this week without any kind of a television storyline explanation, and said since he was a WWF wrestler, they didn't want him around and attacked him. After the attack, Ramon said that he wasn't Razor Ramon, that Scott Hall was Razor Ramon and left the WWF, and since Vince McMahon owned the name, he couldn't wrestle under that name anymore. He said McMahon wanted him to become Razor Ramon and that McMahon was going to unhappy with him because he isn't going to be Ramon anymore because that's what got him into trouble. No shows are being advertised for Memphis, and it appears the promotion has pulled out of running at the Big One Expo Center. That's almost a certainty because the Big One called ECW and asked them if they'd like to run regular shows at the building, which obviously for both transportation, economic and political reasons isn't going to happen. Ox Brody on his interview called himself Ox Baker. Billy Travis had a really good television match with Flash Flanagan ending when Travis used a chain for the pin. Travis started singing, but Christopher came out and said his singing was a joke. Brody and Christopher argued, which led to a wild chain match which included them brawling into an ambulance that supposed Brody had brought for Christopher to ride out in. After a ref bump, Christopher hit the superkick. But with the ref still out, Travis KO'd Christopher with the guitar for the pin. As Christopher was being stretchered out and taken to the ambulance, he did the Steve Austin and got up off the stretcher. They aired another tape of a 1982 match with Dutch Mantle against Jerry Lawler. It wound up with Mantle arguing with Stacy and threatening her until Lawler came out to make the save. Here and there. Some notes on the funeral of Joan Weston on May 14 in Hayward. Approximately 400 people attended, packing the church, mainly former fans and her skating contemporaries. It was quite different from the Ray Stevens funeral last year, in that the Ray Stevens funeral was all about pro wrestling. But this funeral was more about a person, and the roller derby just happened to be what she did, even though many in attendance recognized it as the final burial as much of a sport as of a person, their own personal big chill. Among those in attendance included Jerry Seltzer, the longtime roller derby promoter, Hal Janowitz, her coach in the 50s on the Chicago Westerners, Buddy Atkinson Sr., Lydia Clay, Pam Harrison, Jan Vallow, a pallbearer who really was broken up at the funeral, which was touching to so many people who remembered her as the ultimate badass woman of her era, Sherry Eric, Sandy Dunn, Dolores Tucker, Susie Wong, Rosetta Saunders, Jacques Guerrero, Jerry Cattell, Slambroree Ppv and trackside announcer of that era Larry Lee, Ken Willis, John Parker, Frank Macedo, Barbara Baker, Carol Peanuts Meyer, J.J. Burton, JoJo Stafford, Taft Waters, Sue Frigulia, Darlene Forbes, Pam Kaniva, Lester Quarles, Frank Apodaca, husband Nick Scopus, and I'm certain there were others as well. Many of those hadn't seen each other since the 60s or early 70s. Bill Grohl and Ann Calvello couldn't attend due to work commitments but were at a rosary the previous night. The obit of Weston was carried by the wire services as the lead national obit on May 12 and made newspapers around the country. Frank Deford did a commentary on ESPN Radio on May 15 and was scheduled to do another on National Public Radio on May 21. Deford, who at the age of 27 went on tour with Derby to do a story for Sports Illustrated, called Weston one of the 2 or 3 best female athletes he ever saw, saying nothing angers me more than when people refer to major and minor sports. There are only major and minor athletes, depending on who cares, who tries, and never mind the sport. Joan Weston was a major magnificent athlete. On NPR he went even further, saying in her prime 30 years ago she was Jordanique, Ruthian. Scopus has set up a fund for contributions for research on Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease which has gotten a lot of local publicity at Joan Weston Fund, U.S. Bank, 987 B Street, Hayward, California 94541. There was also a lengthy column about her funeral on the May 15 San Jose Mercury. Steve Nelson's next USWF show will be June 20th at the Amarillo Fairgrounds with a light heavyweight tournament and 4 major singles matches featuring Don Frye, Nelson, Paul Jones and Ali Elias along with a women's match. I just saw a tape of the card and as mentioned on the last show, the level of heat at these matches is amazing. The heat in the women's match reminded me of tapes of Bruno Sammartino in a bitter feud in his prime in the pop when Evan Tanner beat Paul Buntello to win the heavyweight tournament was on par with Oleg Toktarov's win over Tank Abbott or Sting's first title win over Ric Flair. Aside from it just being a rowdy crowd that comes to see real matches and is very understanding and rabid as to what it is seeing, is because the ring announcer for these shows, Bruce Stark, has an incredible knack of what to say and how to say it. It's hard to explain but if you'd see a tape you'd realize just how valuable he is as far as picking the crowd up when it starts dying off during these 19-match long house shows. The current plan is for Dan Severn to face Paul Buntello to crown a USWF World Heavyweight Champion in August. Tanner, who won the tournament to earn a heavyweight title shot, isn't on the next card. Originally Tanner, a local high school wrestling star who was a 2-time state champion, who blitzed everyone in the tournament, had indicated he was only going to do one show. Dennis Corraluzzo is doing a wrestling radio show on WNWR AM, 1540 AM, hour of Philadelphia from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. on Sunday nights. Greg Price's All-Star Wrestling has shows June 13th in Andrews, North Carolina at the high school and June 14th in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina at Northampton County High East with Rock and Roll Express, Kimona, Jimmy Valiant, Greg Valentine, Mr. Hughes and Billy Kidman. Green Mountain Wrestling has a 16-man tournament on June 8th in Newport, Vermont featuring some of the top New England indie wrestlers. NHB. As it turns out, the knee injury to Ricardo Moraes suffered while training in the Middle East is serious enough to keep him out of the May 30th UFC. No word on whether he'll be back in time for the June 21st ring show. His place will be taken by Jason Farron, whose lone UFC appearance was back on December 16, 1994 at UFC 4, losing to Guy Mesger in 213. He'll face pro wrestler Tony Holme in the first round of what has to be labeled as by far the weakest tournament field in UFC history. One of the strangest in a number of ways, situations involving an NHB show in the United States took place on Buddy Albine's IFC show on May 15 in Metairie, Louisiana. The show drew a whopping 4,000 fans into the New Orleans suburb for a show sanctioned and allowed by the Louisiana Boxing Commission. The bad news is that after the fiasco of a main event, it may have killed NHB from returning to Louisiana. The main event was actually 2 pro wrestlers, during a pro wrestling cage match in an octagon. Rod Price, billed as a former NFL football player, he was in a training camp although never made a team, against Dikembe Aluonite of South Africa. The South African wound up being Perry Action Jackson, who was well known by some of the audience as an area pro wrestler. Fans began loud booing since they did a worked match, throwing junk and beer and chanting it was fake, which it was, although it appeared to be the only fake match on the show. The commission was so upset they held up the gate receipts from the show. The promoters claimed they had not booked a worked match, although they did agree that it was a bad match, But what do they expect when they put two pro wrestlers who have been working together for years in a shoot fight, not to mention that neither has ever done this before, and that they fraudulently billed Jackson as being from South Africa with a fake name. Two other pro wrestlers worked the undercard, with local wrestler Kevin Northcutt, who also works in the area as the Sandman, not to be confused with the ECW wrestler, winning a preliminary fight, and Carl Greco, who has experience with pro wrestling Fujiwara Gumi, lost a first-round match in the over 200 tournament. Anthony Macias, an experienced NHB journeyman, won the under 200 tournament, while Gary Myers, who is 1-1-1 in EFC, who did pro wrestling in Indiana Indies many years ago, destroyed two opponents in a total time of 1:36 to win the heavyweights, just 9 days before his Japanese pro wrestling debut with Pancrase against COP champion Yuki Kondo on May 24 in Kobe. Monty Cox Extreme Challenge ran a show on May 10 in Battle Creek, Michigan before an estimated 1,000 fans. The only named fighters appearing were Paul Verlins, who destroyed Scott Taylor in 42 seconds, and Dan Severn, who beat Matt Hume student John Renfro in 2:29 when the ref stopped the fight. Reports we received is that the Severn match looked legit, but it was a one-sided match since Renfro wasn't of his caliber. Severn is scheduled for his next fight on July 6 in Brazil. Randy Couture, 33, who captured the recent U.S. Greco-Roman Championships at 213 pounds and was named Outstanding Wrestler of the entire tournament, is set to make his NHB debut on the June 15 Brazilian Open in a heavyweight tournament that includes Roberto Traven, who won the most recent tournament in Russia, and also Verlins. Couture was slated to replace Moraes in the May 30 UFC and was generally expected to win, but the two sides couldn't come to terms. He's the current assistant wrestling coach at Oregon State, has won the Greco-Roman Nationals 3 times although never made the Olympic team, placed 5th in a national Samba tournament and has boxing experience. In 1991 and 1992, while wrestling for Oklahoma State, he took second in the NCAA tournament. Dan Henderson, 26, who represented the U.S. in Greco-Roman in the 1992 and 1996 Olympics at 180 pounds, didn't medal either time, and was second in the 1994 World Cup, debuts in the 176-pound weight class in the same competition. ECW this weekend was the debut shows for Syracuse and Buffalo on May 16 and May 17 respectively. Syracuse drew 500 to 700 fans with largely the typical lineup with Terry Funk over Raven, Eliminators over Dudleys and Gangstas to keep the tag titles, and Shane Douglas and Francine over Tommy Dreamer and Beulah in the key matches. Rick Rude once again carried Francine away from ringside upside down and gave her an apparent hickey on her butt in the process. Finish saw Louis Spicolli interfere, giving Dreamer a Death Valley driver so Douglas could pin him. In the Funk Raven match, the BWO came out after Stevie Richards came out. The BWO announced that Blue Meanie would be their new leader since Richards seems to be turning on them, and Richards beat up Meanie and Nova to the back. Sandman, after beating Balls Mahoney, invited a fan into the ring to hit him in the head with a beer can until it drew blood, and it literally took shot after shot before Sandman opened up. Buffalo was a huge success, drawing one of the company's biggest houses in history, $1,697 and $29,900 in a 3,500-seat arena that was said to be the nicest building ECW has ever run in. The big television angle was in a tag match where Raven and Richards, who were reluctant partners, beat Funk and Dreamer when Richards pinned Funk. This was to set up a Funk vs. Richards title match for June 7 at the ECW arena. The main event was a four-way dance with Funk, Richards, Raven and Sandman, which ended up with Funk winning over Richards at the end. There was a spot where Funk threw a guardrail up in the air and it accidentally hit Richards in the back of the head and neck, and he was knocked cold and couldn't move, and had no feeling for several minutes. He was taken to the hospital, although by the time he went to the hospital he was okay and did a run-in on an indie show the next day. Chris Chetty impressed everyone in having a very good TV title match against Shane Douglas, which is supposed to air this week. Chris Condito missed the Buffalo show because Tammy Sitch's 16-year-old niece passed away in a car accident the night before. That also explains why Sonny wasn't on Raw this week. Mikey Whipwreck has been back wrestling and never had the knee surgery, although he still needs it. There is some sort of an insurance problem when it comes to the surgery, which has delayed it. Apparently he can work a limited amount before the knee bothers him, so will be in action, and they'll shoot a major angle when he is finally getting the surgery, which should be soon. This week's television is largely focused on making Rob Van Dam into the top heel in the group for appearing on WWF television and being affiliated with Jerry Lawler. Paul Heyman is once again interested in bringing Lawler into the ECW arena to shoot an angle because Lawler would be the most over heel ever in ECW. Van Dam was suspended, since he's on the Japan tour, but will return likely on June 7 at the arena. Bruce Pritchard apparently has been clamoring for more ECW stuff on the WWF television because it gets internet reaction. In addition, everyone at WWF was surprised at just how over Van Dam got at the Raw last week. The idea is to build to a Sabu and Van Dam vs. Tommy Dreamer and Sandman feud for the summer. Van Dam did receive an offer from WCW, and WCW at one point was confident he'd be going, although it wasn't like they saw him as being another Kurt Hennig or anything like that. I'd suspect that up until the pay-per-view show, he probably was going, and when the angle of his leaving got him over so strong, from that point on I'd figure his leaving was a work. Heyman said that he's going to use PG-13 underneath and hopefully rebuild them, but recognized the Road Warriors match did tremendous damage to them and that he can't push them hard right now. He figures it's similar to his using Tracy Smothers, who is a WWF jobber. Now Smothers is starting to get over as a heel since he's no longer on WWF television. Todd Gordon got attention that he likely didn't want this past week. His family business, Carver W. Reed Jewelers, was a hot commodity when it was revealed that murder suspect Craig Rabinowitz allegedly hawked the engagement ring of his wife that he's suspecting of murdering with Gordon. Several TV stations along with Good Morning America and People magazine were wanting to talk with Gordon, who was ducking everyone, saying his loans are all confidential. One TV station showed up at the May 11th ECW show, but Gordon ducked that reporter as well. All of the hawked jewelry is now in police hands. According to a short item in the Philadelphia Daily News on May 14th, Rabinowitz took out a $1,250 loan in 1994 and had been paying interest, and returned on May 2nd after he was under suspicion for his wife's death for a second $1,000 loan. Caught a tape of the May 4th and May 5th two-part I-Team investigative feature on ECW on Wajar in Providence put together by Diana Kolsch. The first part dealt with the Eric Kulas incident and the second part dealt with the fans' bloodlust and insensitivity toward the violence in general. With the exception of the unforgivable error in stating ECW is banned in Rhode Island, it's UFC that's banned in Rhode Island, the piece was pretty fair and accurate. They showed clips of New Jack slicing up Kulas and said the most graphic footage wouldn't air, which was the truth, as the worst of the tape didn't air, which showed they sacrificed shock value of the puddle of blood in the ring and the faucet-like spurting of blood due to their own concerns with viewer sensitivity, and also told viewers ahead of time how graphic some of the footage would be. The gist of the story was Kulas had not sued ECW but had indicated that he would be doing so. An interesting note is that Kulas' forehead cut looked no different from a gig mark that most wrestlers of the 70s would have in the days. Blading was more of a part of the business and not an ear-to-ear cut as Kulas had claimed. This is not to defend ECW or New Jack in the slightest for the November incident, which was possibly the single most revolting thing I've ever seen as a wrestling fan. ECW was lucky that Kolsch didn't investigate the background of New Jack, because it would make ECW look even worse for having hired him and having kept him after the series of incidents he's done over the past year. They did, however, air a clip from a RF videotape New Jack shoot interview, which has since been pulled from sales, where New Jack was wearing a mask and watching a tape of the Kulas incident and laughing about it. Paul Heyman was asked about the incident and said that it was an isolated incident that he didn't want to discuss because it should be addressed by attorneys. The second part was on the ECW crowd, in particular the Revere, Massachusetts crowd, and how they reacted to the violence. They had a sociologist who called ECW the closest thing he's ever seen to a human cockfight, where have we heard that line before? And said basically the same thing every sociologist on every UFC piece in the media says. Heyman said that his product is for adults and that 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds shouldn't come to the show, and then they aired clips of young children buying tickets and attending the show. They interviewed the father of one of the kids who basically blew it off, saying he just wanted to take his kid to wrestling matches, and some fans who said that they came because they liked the blood. In pieces like this, the problem always is you never know how many fans they interviewed to get the desired response from one of them. If they interviewed fans who were concerned about the level of violence, those clips traditionally never make it on the air because it weakens the story. Based on what Kolsch's piece attempted to be, it was overall a good piece, raised important questions, and in the long run probably will result in nothing significant happening. However, and Paul Heyman is more aware of this than anyone, due to the political climate right now, once the forces of good run UFC off television, one false move, and ECW will be the next target, and they won't survive a political attack any better unless their attackers are given no more graphic ammunition to play with. I can tell you as a fact that Heyman is more zealous when it comes to editing his television show for possible problems, whether it be a shot taken wrong that could be a problem or a bad word, than WWF or WCW are at this time, because of the reality of the situation he isn't under now but could be under any time in the near future. On this past week's television, Rick Rude continued his spree of double entendres.
He's great as far as having presence. The other thing is that Rude, who is about 6'4" in a promotion where almost all the wrestlers are deceptively short, makes Joey Styles really small in the stand-ups. They use Rude to play off Joel Gertner, who is hilarious in his role of a fat college kid who thinks he's a babe magnet.
However, Rude is really bad when it comes to the color commentary of the matches themselves. Also on the show, they aired the spot where Spicoli gave Beulah the Death Valley driver. Rude and Styles played it up as if it was the most horrible thing they'd ever seen, which is ironic since Beulah's original role in ECW was as a heel taking piledriver after piledriver from Dreamer in spots designed and successful in getting Dreamer over as a face. WCW. There appeared to be even more of a feeling this week that the booking change was something more than temporary, although only a few know for sure. Terry Taylor appears to be doing much of the detail work along with J.J. Dillon, although most seem to think Kevin Nash is a very strong influence on much of what is going on, and it's Nash who was Sullivan's biggest critic. Those close to Sullivan say that he fully expects to be back as Booker when he returns. Top matches on the June 15th pay-per-view show from Moline, Illinois appear to be Hall and Kevin Nash vs. Ric Flair and Roddy Piper for the tag team title, which would likely result in the Flair/Piper split and feud, Diamond Dallas Page vs. Randy Savage, Steve McMichael vs. Kevin Green, and Chris Benoit vs. Meng.
Nitro on May 19th in Asheville, North Carolina drew 4,330 paying $69,324.
Show opened with Flair doing a good interview, Six challenged him, and they brawled to lead to a main event match. Steve Regal kept the TV title beating Prince Iaukea in 2:25 of a one-sided squash, so the Prince protection plan is over with the Booker change. Masahiro Chono beat David Taylor with STF in 2:58.
Afterwards, Sonny Ono told Chono he had a big surprise nightmare for him next week on Nitro, who will likely turn out to be Great Muta. The probable scenario is that Muta will then turn on Ono and join the NWO after all. They announced Nick Patrick was back as referee on a probationary period. To get him over as a face, Patrick caused Scotty Riggs to beat M. Wall Street by twice stopping Wall Street from using illegal tactics and kicking his hands off the ropes, causing him to be pinned in 2:46.
Wall Street's latest gimmick is that he hates WCW for not letting him be in the NWO. Please don't try and make sense out of this. Steiners beat Jeff Jarrett and McMichael in 3:35 when Kevin Green hit McMichael with the briefcase.
McMichael and Green then brawled in the dressing room.
That was actually all pretty good. Flair vs. Six only lasted 57 seconds before Hall and Nash interfered for the DQ, and they gave Flair both the outsider's edge and the jackknife and left him laying. The show ended with an Eric Bischoff interview running down Sting, saying they know he wasn't coming out of the ceiling, and Sting came from under the ring and gave Bischoff the Scorpion Death Drop. After the show went off the air, Sting stuffed Bischoff down the hole in the ring he came up through until Hall and Nash came out and pulled Bischoff out.
It was a very anti-NWO crowd, perhaps the most vocal anti-NWO and pro-Flair crowd for a Nitro since the NWO started.
In the dark matches, Yuji Nagata beat Pat Tanaka, Dean Malenko beat Rey Mysterio Jr. with the Cloverleaf in a 3¼ stars match, Wrath beat Johnny Swinger, Hugh Morris pinned Yuji Yasurioka, Public Enemy beat Conan and Psychosis, and Diamond Dallas Page pinned Mortis.
Ratings for May 19th saw Nitro do a 3.10 rating and 6.08 share, while Raw did a 3.60, 3.53 first hour, 3.68 seconds hour, rating and 5.36 share. Both numbers were great in that each show hit its highest rating of the last month. Nitro Replay did a 1.6. Other WCW weekend ratings saw Main Event at 1.2, Saturday Night at 2.2 and Pro at 1.5. The shows go back to head-to-head on May 26th with TNT's Monday Night NBA coverage finished as of this week. USA Network on Sunday was actually running promos saying that TNT was preempting its wrestling on Monday, but that USA would have 2 hours of live wrestling starting at 8 p.m. Hector Garza was there but didn't wrestle, so he can now be added to the roster of the greatest jobber crew in the history of wrestling. For Los Angeles on June 28th, after some thoughts that it wouldn't be a Hogan vs. Sting match, there is going to be some sort of a gimmick Hogan vs. Sting match, although we're not clear exactly what it'll be. Time Warner officially nixed whatever plans were left to move the offices from Atlanta to Orlando. The latest on the Thursday live TBS primetime show are that Bischoff doesn't want to do the show unless TBS can guarantee them a time slot where they won't be preempted by other sports events, and at this point, with all the baseball coverage every summer, there was no night TBS could make that guarantee. Fans were banned from bringing posters into the Nitro on May 12th in Baltimore.
Kevin Green did a radio interview promoting the pay-per-view and was asked about going into wrestling full-time after football. Green said that when he retires from football, he's retiring from things physical. He put over the physical demands of being a wrestler and said he wouldn't mind doing it for an occasional big show, but it's not something he wants to do full-time. Saturday night tapings were May 13th in Salisbury, Maryland before 2,500 paying $33,000. Yuji Yasuhiro debuted winning a squash.
For next week's show, Malenko beat Nagata in what was said to have been the only good match on the taping. Joe Gomez to Renegade. Liz Mark Jr. beats Super Calo in a decent match, and Giant got the win over Marcus Bagwell via pinning the interfering NWO Sting. Antonio Pena lost a lawsuit in Mexico regarding breach of contract, where he claimed the rights to La Parca, Super Calo, Juventud Guerrera and Psicosis because he had them under contract, and then they signed WCW contracts. Pena and Parca are still in a legal fight over who owns the rights to the La Parca name. Only house show of the week was May 17th in Winston-Salem, North Carolina before 4,400 paying $66,000. Regal beat Alex Wright in a match where Regal worked as a total babyface.
Riggs no-showed a match with Bagwell, so Bagwell hit 3 poses and said the fans had gotten their money's worth and left. Mysterio Jr. pinned Psicosis in an American-style match. In a non-title match which wasn't announced as non-title, Jarrett beat Dragon with the figure 4. Malenko beat Six via DQ in the best match on the show when Hall and Nash interfered. Steiners beat Public Enemy in a terrible match. In a handicap match, Giant, who was supposed to team with Lex Luger but Luger was there but still injured, beat Hall and Nash via DQ and Six interfered and Luger made the save, and then Page beat Savage via DQ and Bagwell interfered, and Bagwell took the diamond cutter. So 3 of the last 4 matches, all involving NWO, ended in outside interference DQs. The Slambroree Barker Channel commercials with Rhodes, Heenan and Zbyszko talked about the following wrestlers being on the show: Piper, Sting, Luger, Page, Hogan and Savage, and how they'd all be in a cage. Of course, there was no cage, no new commercial, and the only one of those guys actually appearing on the show in a match was Piper. The May 6th Chicago Tribune had a story on kids amateur wrestling focused on Ric Flair, 9, who is Rick's son and an age group champion in North Carolina. Nitro schedule for July through September: July 7th in Memphis, July 14th in Orlando, July 21st in Jacksonville, July 28th in Charleston, West Virginia, August 4th in Auburn Hills, Michigan, August 11th in Denver, August 18th Birmingham, August 25th in Columbia, South Carolina, September 1st in Pensacola, September 8th in Milwaukee, September 15th in Charlotte, September 22nd in Salt Lake City, and September 29th in Roanoke. Other major shows during those months are Bash at the Beach pay-per-view on July 13th in Daytona Beach, Luger and Giant vs. Hogan and Rodman July 26th in Philadelphia at Core State Spectrum, August 9th Hog Wild pay-per-view from Sturgis, South Dakota, Hogan vs. Luger, August 21st in Nashville, August 22nd in Knoxville, September 7th in Chicago at United Center, September 14th Fall Brawl pay-per-view from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, September 18th in Portland, Oregon at the Rose Garden, September 19th in Seattle, September 20th at the San Francisco Cow Palace, and September 27th at Baltimore Arena. The secret wrestler debuting in Las Vegas on June 30th at Nitro is likely Kurt Hennig. WWF Raw on May 19th drew a sellout 6,205 fans and a city all-time record $92,575 in Mobile, Alabama. Raw has turned into a total copy of Nitro with all the infeuding and 4 minutes or less matches, same open with the same style pyro and even adding the new announcer at the beginning of the second hour. Show started with them hinting at a tag title match on May 26th with Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels challenging Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith. Austin and Michaels did 2 pull-apart brawls while Hart and Smith laughed. It wound up with each saying they were going to get a partner. Michaels chose Ken Shamrock. Austin at first asked Sable, going into her dressing room while she didn't have a top on it, she had to put an Austin shirt to cover her chest, then asked Harvey Whippleman and threatened to beat him up if he didn't agree. Brooklyn Brawler asked to be Austin's partner, but Austin beat him up and said that he sucked, which should start all those rumors all over again. With Vader injured from the Shamrock match legit, his legs were shot from all the leg kicks to the point he couldn't even walk until Friday and needed fluid drained from his knee, not to mention catching a knee to the nose which broke the nose in 4 places. He couldn't wrestle Crush in the King of the Ring qualifying match. So Helmsley beat Crush in 3:56 when Savio Vega's attempted interference backfired. Jerry Briscoe tried to explain that Helmsley was back and so the WWF would avoid a lawsuit as ref Tim White incorrectly gave him instructions in last week's match with Ahmed Johnson. It's hard to make sense booking backwards after an unexpected injury, and that explanation really made no sense.
Like if he got DQ'd, he thought he'd advance in the tournament?
Crush and Vega again teased a split, throwing down Clarence. Am I really even here anymore? Mason before Farouk calmed them down. Bob Holly, in his hometown, beat Owen Hart in a non-title match in 3:37 with an inside cradle and a decent match.
Later in the show the Hart Foundation all destroyed Holly.
They did an absolutely fantastic interview segment with Mankind, revealing him as Mick Foley, showing high school pictures of him, saying he used to be Cactus Jack and totally turning him babyface. They're going to show clips of his winning the King of the Death Matches tournament in Japan next week. Isn't it amazing why every celebrity, when they are trying to get sympathy, claims to have gone through high school without ever having a date? I'm sure most, if not all the stories told were true, however.
Scott Taylor beat Leif Cassidy in 240 with an inside cradle. They tried to build this up as a precursor to developing a light heavyweight division, but Taylor looked sloppy. Cassidy is doing a gimmick where he's about to snap because he keeps losing.
Bret Hart did an interview saying that if he didn't beat Michaels in less than 10 minutes at King of the Ring, that he'd never wrestle in the US again. Michaels agreed to the challenge provided Owen, Bulldog, Pillman and Neidhart are all handcuffed to the ring post. Judging from his delivery, there appeared to be something wrong with Michaels, and there was heat on him for making the comment about Bret seeing a lot of sunny days since they weren't supposed to be making inside references that have nothing to do with storyline anymore. Guess that means we'll get the debut of the newest member of the Foundation leading to Bret's win. The fact they're going to do a short match with all those guys at ringside as a distraction says that Bret's knee really won't be ready in time. It's touch and go as far as the house shows in June whether Bret will work them in the triangle matches with Undertaker. Shawn and Bret may wind up as Undertaker, Shawn, and Austin. Rockabilly beat Goldust via DQ in 4:02 when Goldust hit Honky Tonk Man with his guitar after HTM tried to interfere. Goldust got a lot better reaction this week than the past few months after the segments. Told the Pop when he came out, which was off television, shocked the hell out of everyone. They tried to use Goldust's 3-year-old daughter to get him over as a face. They dressed her like a mini Marlena and tried to get her to say Goldust, although neither here nor at MSG 2 nights earlier did she say it. She did grab the mic from her mom and ran away with it, causing Jim Ross to say that she was just like her grandfather hogging the mic. Ahmed Johnson did an interview saying that Farouk was right about the WWF never letting a black hold the title, but then said how he's going to win the title for all the fans of all colors. WWF was using the race card in an attempt to garner interest in Undertaker vs. Farouk, then at the same time crying about how bad it was to use the race card. Farouk beat Rocky Maivia in 2:35 with the Dominator. When Nation of Domination went to attack Rocky, Farouk stopped them, I guess because Maivia's half black, although that was never expressly said. Undertaker did an interview complaining about how Farouk is playing the race card. Gee, stupid me, I thought it was Vince McMahon. Paul Bearer got on the screen and said he was going to reveal the secret unless Undertaker agreed to let him manage him again, but Undertaker begged him not to and said to give him another week to make up his mind as a ratings tease since the shows are back to head-to-head next week. Austin beat Neidhart via DQ in 150 when the rest of the NWO, whoops, Hart Foundation interfered. Michaels made the save with a chair, but then Austin and Michaels wound up brawling with each other and they announced that Monsoon is ordering them to team up next week on TV. So instead of making Michaels return on pay-per-view, they've rushed it to garner a TV rating. Michaels-Austin angle and Austin's persona of not wanting a partner and being on his own would make a lot more sense if Austin wasn't already teaming with all the babyfaces at all the house shows. May 17th at Madison Square Garden drew 10,702 paid, around 15,000 in the building, and $233,595 plus another $108,000 in merchandise sales. With Vader injured, the planned Undertaker and Shamrock vs. Vader and Mankind match turned into Undertaker defending the title against Mankind in a lumberjack match. Shamrock was also pulled as being the third man in 6-man main events this coming weekend, and now the bouts will be Undertaker and Austin vs. Owen and Bulldog, with Pillman also pulled from the matches and just working the corner. Mankind got the mandible claw on but was then attacked by the Nation of Domination, with the idea being that they wanted to make sure Undertaker won to preserve Farouk's shot. Nation of Domination distracted ref while Undertaker tombstoned Mankind on a chair to win. After Nation of Domination then attacked Undertaker. Other key results saw Vega pin Maivia when Crush distracted Rocky and they did a 3-on-1 after. Helmsley beat Goldust when Chyna tripped him,
Farouk pinned Johnson when Vega hit Johnson 3 times with a chair after a ref bump, and Austin and LOD beat Owen and Bulldog and Pillman when Austin used the stunner on Owen in a very good match. As far as the status of different wrestlers and rumors, PG-13 is gone after the Road Warriors deal. Apparently the guys think it's that Jerry Lawler had them fired because they're working opposition to Lawler in Tennessee, although that's been denied internally. They were told there is a chance they'll be brought back for the light heavyweight division, but that would likely be only for television purposes if it happens at all. JC Ice had gotten a lot of heat in his short tenure there. The Funkettes haven't been officially eliminated, but unless things change, don't expect to see them around as a cost-cutting measure. It appears they're trying to get them to drop their per-show price as it's an expensive entourage act, particularly for a wrestler getting no push. Tracy Smothers probably won't be used since he's working ECW, and he'd only be used here as a jobber, which would hurt him in ECW. Henry Godwin returned on May 17 at Madison Square Garden. Vader's injuries, besides a beaten-up thigh and knee and a broken nose in 4 places, included a broken septum in the nose. It's the nose as opposed to the leg problems that have him out of action because he can't breathe well through the nose, and it will likely have to be fixed by surgery, so he may be out for a while. Sultan's ribs hadn't healed to where he could return this past weekend as scheduled, but they are hopeful he'll be back for the May 23rd show in Auburn Hills. On May 18th, Shotgun, as Sonny told Mankind I Won't Bite, Ryan Pillman came back with She Won't Bite, but she certainly will swallow. To which Jim Ross quickly threw in the line, Pride. Ticket prices have been raised in Madison Square Garden starting with the next show on September 13th from $26 to $32 for ringside. Although no deal has been completed, there is a strong probability a deal is going to be worked out with Michinoku Pro Wrestling, including being a strong part of the light heavyweight division. There is nothing new on the Mexican front other than continuation of relations with AAA don't look good, and there is more interest in EMLL, although no deal there as of yet. There is nothing when it comes to a deal as far as we can tell regarding Silver King coming in at present, although if a deal is made with EMLL, he's likely to be among the first in. King of the Ring pay-per-view will have 7 matches. The 2 semis, Hunter vs. Johnson, Goldust vs. Mankind, and the finals of King of the Ring plus Undertaker Farouk, Austin Pillman, Bret Michaels and LOD vs. Owen and Bulldog. The problem on the May 12th show where the Bret Sean Austin Foundation angle didn't air wasn't planned like that. What they showed on the weekend was supposed to air live. Bret simply rambled on too long and missed his time cue. There was a huge article on the Monday Night Wars in the May 12th Baltimore Sun by Kevin Eck. It's very rare to read a mainstream article that is accurate, intelligent and fair, but this was one of the better ones. It talked about WWF and WCW both getting more hard-edged, WCW winning the ratings consistently, Hogan's turn, WWF countering with sex, violence and crude language and blood. In the article, Vince McMahon claimed the blood in recent PPVs by Vader and Austin were both accidental. We have a policy that strictly prohibits the old practice of intentional bloodletting. However, what we do is extremely physical and sometimes things do get out of hand. Nevertheless, the blood suspiciously played out perfectly in the storylines of both matches. The Vader blood was put on the cover of the WWF's own magazine and played up big on television, although the office claimed it was a hard way. The Austin blood was a blade job despite the denial by McMahon, but the claim was that Austin did it without McMahon's knowledge or approval. The article claimed the change in the 2 major promotions to a more violent, crude and sexually suggestive product was due to the influence and success of ECW and UFC. The other weekend house shows saw May 16th in Albany, New York draw $4,972 and $80,741, and May 18th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana drew $4,834 and $75,855. Officially, Scott Putski was a senior at Texas Christian University in 1988, so he was younger than we had indicated but is older than was said on WWF television. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire at 1.3 and Superstars at 1.4.